My son announced at his own retirement party that his father was a janitor who never amounted to anything. He didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. He said it with a kind of practiced sadness, like he'd rehearsed it, like it was just a fact about the weather. Standing there at the front of the room in his new Patagonia vest and his Birkenstocks, talking to 80 people from his tech company about his humble origins and how he'd built himself from nothing. And I'm sitting at a table near the back, next to the coat rack, thinking, I mopped floors for 6 weeks in 1987. 6 weeks between contracts. My son had no idea I had $4.2 million in a Vanguard account and owned the building his company had just signed a 10-year lease on. I want to tell you how we got here. How my own son became someone who could erase 30 years of a man's life in front of a room full of strangers and call it gratitude. My name is Frank. I'm 63 years old. For 28 years, I was a licensed master electrician, running my own electrical contracting business in Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous. Nobody puts electrician on a cocktail party introduction. But commercial electrical work, hospitals, data centers, school districts, government buildings, that work is quiet and it pays extremely well if you know what you're doing and you stay reliable. My wife Sandra and I raised our son Eric in a 3-bedroom house in Worthington. We had a good life, not flashy. Sandra drove a Camry for 11 years before we replaced it. I drove pickup trucks because I needed them for work. Eric wore good clothes, played travel baseball, went to a decent private school because Sandra believed in that, but we never talked about money in front of him the way some parents do. We didn't brag. We didn't explain ourselves. That was probably our first mistake. Eric saw a father who left the house at 6 in the morning with tools in the back of a truck. He saw a man who came home smelling like copper wire and drywall dust. He saw invoices on the kitchen table, job site photos on the fridge, conversations with Sandra about payroll and insurance that he was too young to understand, but old enough to register as stress. He constructed a story about us in his head, the way kids do. And by the time he was in his 20s, that story had calcified into something he believed completely. Dad was a blue-collar guy who worked hard. Mom was a dental hygienist. We were comfortable, but not successful. Not really. In 2004, I won the bid on the electrical systems for the new Riverside Medical Center expansion in Columbus. $4 million contract over 30 months. After that came the Dublin School District renovation. Then a data center in Westerville for a logistics company whose name you'd recognize. By 2010, my business had 17 employees, and I was clearing about $380,000 a year in net income. I paid myself a modest salary, reinvested the rest, and started putting money into real estate on the side because Sandra's brother was a commercial property attorney, and he kept telling me the math made sense. He was right. By 2015, I owned 3 commercial properties outright. A small office building in Hilliard, a strip center in Grove City, and a 4-story mixed-use property on East 5th Avenue in Columbus that I picked up in 2011 for $1.1 million when the previous owner couldn't refinance after the financial crisis. I didn't tell Eric any of this, not because I was hiding it exactly, more because he never asked. He went to Ohio State, graduated with a computer science degree, moved to San Francisco, and started building what he always called his real life. The implication was there, even if he never said it out loud, real life happened out there. What we had in Columbus was just where it came from. Sandra died in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer, the fast kind. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Eric flew home twice. Both times he had to leave for work. I understood. I'm not saying I didn't understand, but I noticed. At the funeral, he gave a beautiful eulogy about his mother. He talked about her warmth, her patience, her faith. Then, almost as an aside, he said something I've thought about probably 1,000 times since. He said, she deserves so much more than she got out of life. And he meant it kindly. He genuinely meant it as a compliment to her. But what it told me was that he looked at our life together, Sandra's and mine, and saw a woman who had settled. I drove home from the cemetery and sat in my kitchen for a long time. About 8 months after Sandra died, Eric met a woman named Courtney at a product launch event in Palo Alto. Her family was from Westchester, New York. Her father was a partner at a private equity firm. Her mother sat on the board of two nonprofits, and they had a summer place on Nantucket that Courtney mentioned within the first 15 minutes of meeting me at Thanksgiving that year. I liked Courtney fine. She was smart and ambitious and made my son happy. What I didn't like was the way Eric changed in her presence. He became a narrator of his own story in a way he hadn't been before. He started describing his background with a particular kind of theatrical modesty, the way people do when they want credit for overcoming something without actually having suffered all that much. He told Courtney's parents that his father had worked trades his whole life, that his mother had worked in healthcare, just a hygienist, but she loved it. That he'd put himself through most of college on scholarships and grit, which was true only in the selective way that a half-truth is true. What he didn't mention was that I had paid his last 2 years of out-of-state tuition in full, that I had co-signed his first car loan and then quietly paid it off when he fell behind, that I had wired him $14,000 in 2016 when a startup he'd invested in collapsed and he didn't have rent. He had thanked me for that one with a Venmo message. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." Then, apparently, filed it somewhere under things that didn't count. I let it go. Sandra would have said something. Sandra always said something, but she wasn't there anymore. And I found that without her, I was less certain about which battles were worth fighting. Eric got a job as VP of engineering at a small tech company called ForgePoint Systems in Austin. They made industrial automation software. Good company, good people, from what I could tell. He moved to Austin in early 2022s. And things were fine between us in the way that things are fine when you talk every 2 weeks and keep it to surface topics. Then, in March of this year, ForgePoint was acquired by a larger firm. Part of Eric's compensation package was early retirement with a full vest of his equity. At 41 years old, my son was walking away with somewhere between $2.8 and $3.4 million, depending on how you counted the restricted stock. A real achievement. I told him that when he called, and I meant it. He'd built something real. The company threw him a retirement party at a restaurant in downtown Austin called the Garrison. Private room, 80 people, open bar, the whole thing. He asked if I'd come down for it, and I said of course I would. I flew in the day before, stayed at a Marriott nearby, brought a card with a handwritten note inside that took me 3 drafts to get right. I should have known something was off when I arrived, and Eric's assistant handed me a name tag that read, "Frank, Eric's dad," and pointed me toward a table near the back of the room. Not the worst seat in the house, but not the seat you'd give your father if you were thinking about him as a person rather than a category. Courtney's parents were at the front table. Her father, a man named Stuart, who I'd met 3 times and who spoke exclusively in the declarative, had apparently flown in from New York. He was holding court near the bar when I walked in, telling a story that made a circle of people laugh with the confidence of a man who has never once questioned whether his stories are interesting. I got myself a club soda and found my seat. The speeches started around 7:30. Eric's colleagues were generous and funny. His boss from ForgePoint talked about Eric's ability to stay calm under pressure. His engineering team had made a video that was genuinely touching. I was proud sitting there, the specific pride of watching your kid become someone competent and respected. Then Eric stood up. He thanked everyone in order of importance, which is a thing you notice when you're not near the top of the list. He thanked his team, his leadership, Courtney's parents, his mentor from Ohio State. And then he got to me. I also want to acknowledge my dad, who's here tonight. He smiled in my direction. Warm enough. My dad worked hard his whole life. He was a janitor for a while, did some electrical work. Odd jobs here and there. He never really had a career in the traditional sense, but he showed up every day, and that counted for something. He paused, and the room did the thing rooms do. When someone says something slightly uncomfortable, they laughed lightly to release the pressure. Honestly, watching him, I knew early on that I wanted something different. I wanted to actually build something. And I think that hunger, that drive to do more than just get by, that's what brought me here tonight. More applause. He moved on to thanking Courtney. I took a drink of my club soda. I want to be honest with you. In the moment, I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder than that. A kind of clarity, actually. Like something I'd been slightly blurry about for years had just come into focus. Eric wasn't describing me. He was using a simplified version of me as a narrative device, a before picture in his own success story. He needed a humble origin, and I was the prop. I reached into my jacket pocket. Not my phone. Not yet. I reached in and touched a folded piece of paper I'd brought from Columbus. A letter Sandra had written to Eric about 4 weeks before she died, when she still had the energy to write. She'd sealed it and given it to me and said, "He'll need this eventually. You'll know when." I had read it once, the night after she died. Then I'd put it in the fireproof lockbox in my office where I keep the important documents. I had brought it to Austin for a different reason. I'd planned to give it to him this weekend, privately, as a kind of gift. Just the two of us, maybe over breakfast. But sitting at that table near the coat rack, listening to the room applaud the story my son had built about his humble origins, I felt Sandra's presence very clearly, and what she seemed to be saying in the particular way she always had of saying things without saying them, was, "Not now. Wait. Watch." So I waited. After the formal speeches, the room loosened up. People moved around, the bar got busier. Courtney's father, Stuart, made his way toward me at some point and offered a handshake that was more of an appraisal. "Frank, Eric talks about you." A pause. "You're in Columbus?" "Yes." "Still working?" "Semi-retired." He nodded in the way that people nod when semi-retired confirms what they already believed. "Good for you," he said. "Eric's done well for himself." As if Eric had done well despite me, rather than with any connection to me whatsoever. I smiled. "He has." Stuart moved on. I finished my club soda and ordered a ginger ale. Around 9 o'clock, the room was winding down. People were getting their coats. The restaurant staff were quietly beginning to clear tables. Eric was across the room saying goodbye to colleagues, and I was considering whether to just find him, give him a hug, tell him I was proud, and fly home in the morning without saying a word about any of it. That's what I would have done if Courtney's mother hadn't walked over to me. Her name was Patricia. She was perfectly pleasant in the way that people are pleasant when they feel they are doing you a favor by being pleasant. She sat down beside me without asking, which I thought was interesting. "Frank," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Do you have a plan?" "For retirement, financially speaking? Stuart and I sometimes work with a financial planner who helps people in, she searched for the word, "in transitions." "Eric mentioned you might need some guidance." I looked at her for a moment. "Eric mentioned that? He's worried about you. He wants to make sure you're taken care of." I sat with that for about 5 seconds. Then, I took out my phone. I want to explain something. What I did next wasn't impulsive. I'm not an impulsive person. I'd been thinking on some level for about 2 years about what I would do if a moment like this arrived. Not planning it exactly. More like holding it in reserve, the way you hold a number in your head when you're doing math and you're not sure yet where it fits. The moment had arrived. "I appreciate that," I said to Patricia. "I actually do have a financial plan. Do you mind if I show you something?" She looked slightly surprised, but nodded. I opened the Vanguard app on my phone and turned the screen toward her. Not my full portfolio breakdown, just a summary screen. The one that shows total account value. 4,218.19, 9,004 cents. Patricia's expression did something complicated. "And that's just the liquid assets," I said, conversationally. "I also own 3 commercial properties in the Columbus metro area. One of them, the mixed-use property on East 5th, was appraised last October at $3.6 million. I own it outright." She stared at me. "Eric doesn't know any of this," I said. "Sandra and I decided a long time ago that we weren't going to make money the center of our family. We didn't think it was good for him to grow up knowing the details. That was probably a mistake. But here we are." Patricia opened her mouth and then closed it. "The guidance offer is kind," I said, "but I think I'm okay." I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked across the room to find my son. Eric was near the door, coat already on, laughing at something someone had said. When he saw me approaching, something in his face shifted. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a person who knows they've left something unresolved and isn't sure if it's about to catch up with them. Hey, Dad, you heading out? In a minute, I said. I wanted to talk to you first. We stepped to one side of the room. The last few guests were filtering out. I heard your speech, I said. He nodded. Waited. I'm not angry, Eric. I want you to know that before I say anything else. I'm not angry. Dad, a janitor, I said. For 6 weeks, in 1987. Between the Bexley School District job and the Columbus Metropolitan Library contract. 6 weeks. I needed something to keep cash moving while I waited for the library payment to clear. And a property manager I knew needed someone to cover for a guy who had had knee surgery. 6 weeks. Eric looked at the floor. The electrical work wasn't odd jobs. I ran a licensed contracting business for 28 years. 17 employees at peak. I built the electrical systems in 4 hospitals, 2 data centers, and more schools than I can count off the top of my head. I know, he said quietly. I know what you did. Then why did you say what you said? He looked up. And here's what I'll give my son. He didn't make an excuse. He stood there for a second, and then he said, because it made a better story. That's the most honest thing he said to me in years, and it hurt the way only honesty can. I know what I paid for your tuition, I said. The last 2 years, when you were at Ohio State, I know what I sent you in 2016 when the startup fell apart. I know about the car loan. I wasn't reading from anything. I had these numbers memorized. Combined, including some other things I won't list right now, I've sent you about $94,000 over the past 15 years. Not because I had to, because you were my son, and I wanted to. Eric was very still. Your mother wrote you a letter before she died, I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed it on a nearby table between us, her handwriting on the envelope, his name. She gave it to me and said I'd know when. I was going to give it to you over breakfast tomorrow, but I think you should read it tonight. He looked at the envelope like it might move. I own the building your company was just leasing, I said, East 5th property. Forge Point's offices were on the 2nd and 3rd floor. I've known that since they signed the lease in 2021. I didn't say anything because it didn't seem relevant and because I was curious to see if you'd figure it out. He hadn't figured it out. The lease transfers to the new parent company in the acquisition. It's a good long-term tenant. I'm keeping the building. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair. I'm flying home tomorrow morning when you're ready to have an honest conversation. Not about the money. I don't care about the money, but about who we actually are to each other. Call me. I left him standing there next to his mother's letter. The flight home was smooth. I watched most of a documentary about national parks and drank 2 cups of coffee and thought about Sandra the way I do on planes. Unhurried, without the guilt that usually comes with thinking about her in rooms where I also have to do things. Eric called 3 days later. He started to apologize, and I let him go for a while, because I think apologies need room. He said he'd read the letter. He didn't tell me what it said, and I didn't ask. Whatever she'd written was between them. I'd honored her timing. That was enough. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, I think I've been embarrassed about where we came from for so long that I forgot to actually look at where we came from. I didn't say anything. Stuart asked me about the building, he added. After Mom. After Patricia told him what you said. He looked it up. Okay. He called it a significant asset. Eric laughed, short and dry. That's Stuart speak for impressed. I don't need Stuart to be impressed, I said. I know. I know you don't. A pause. I need to come to Columbus. I need to see the business, see the properties, see things the way they actually are. Come whenever you want. I'll be here. He came 6 weeks later. We drove around Columbus for 2 days, The two of us in my truck, and I showed him things I'd never thought to show him before. The Riverside Medical Center, where the electrical panel room still has the installation tag from my company on the main breaker. The East Fifth building, where I walked him through the lease structure and the appraisal and what I paid for it in 2011. The small office in Hilliard, where I still keep my files, my license on the wall. Sandra's framed school portrait from when she was teaching dental assisting classes at Columbus State in the 90s, a job I'd never known she took until I found the photo after she died. He was quiet for most of it. On the second afternoon, we sat in my kitchen with coffee, and he said, "Why didn't you ever just tell me?" "Your mom and I talked about it," I said. "We wanted you to build your own thing without thinking you had a net under you. We thought it would make you soft, or entitled. Probably we were wrong." "You weren't entirely wrong," he said. "But I think I built my own story about you guys to fill in the gaps, and I believed it." "I know. The janitor thing." He shook his head. "I've used that in interviews, in panel talks. I have a whole bit about watching my dad mop floors and deciding I wanted more." "You decided you wanted more," I said. "That part's real. What you did with Forge Point, that's yours. I didn't do that." "But the story I built around it was a story," I said. "People do that. I'm not sure we're fixed. I'm not sure families with cracks in them ever fully seal. But something opened up in those 2 days that had been closed for a long time, and I'll take that. I've changed my estate plans, not as punishment, but because my thinking has changed. The commercial properties will go to him. The liquid assets I'm splitting 3 ways. A third to Eric, a third to the Sandra Kowalski Scholarship Fund I set up at the Ohio State Dental Hygiene Program in Sandra's memory, and a third to a trades apprenticeship program at Columbus State that trains young people for licensed electrical work. I told my attorney to make sure it's documented clearly and that Eric receives a full accounting of the estate now, not when I'm gone. He deserves to know what his parents actually built. Sandra would have done all of this differently. She would have had the conversation earlier, softer, with less waiting and fewer dramatic moments in Austin restaurants. She was better at love than I am, more direct about it. But she also trusted me to handle the things I needed to handle in the way I knew how to handle them. She left me that letter and said I'd know when. And when it came, I did. I keep a photo of her on the desk in my office. It's from about 2008 or 2009, taken at the Riverside Medical Center job site. She'd brought lunch and someone on the crew had taken the picture without us knowing. She's laughing at something, coat on, holding a paper bag from Wendy's, and behind her you can see the building. The one I was wiring, that still runs on systems I designed, that's been serving patients for 15 years. That's the picture I look at when I need to remember what we actually built. It was never nothing. I've thought a lot about why Eric built the story he built. Not to excuse it, what he said that night at the Garrison was wrong, and he knows it, but because I think understanding it matters more than staying angry about it. He filled in blanks with assumptions. Sandra and I never handed him the full picture, so he sketched in what made sense to him from the outside. A father with a truck and a tool belt. A mother who worked for someone else's paycheck. A house that was good but not grand. He took those pieces and built a narrative. And then he lived inside that narrative for so long it became true to him. That's not stupidity. That's just what people do when they're not given better information. What I keep coming back to is the cause and effect of silence. I stayed quiet about what I'd built because I believed it was the right way to raise a son. Make him hungry. Make him work. Don't hand him the net. And there's something to that. Eric did work. He did build something real at Forge Point. The drive was genuine, but the version of me he carried around to justify that drive, the failed man, the janitor, the cautionary tale, that version I helped create by never correcting it. My silence shaped his story as much as anything I ever said. That's the part I have to sit with. Not just what Eric did wrong, but what I allowed to grow in the dark for 20 years. There's a thing I have noticed about people who quietly build real lives, and I don't mean just financially. I mean people who show up, do the work, stay honest, honor the people who depend on them. Those people tend to underestimate how much they owe it to themselves to be known accurately. Not for ego, not for credit, but because when the people closest to you don't know who you actually are, they can't treat you like who you actually are. And eventually that gap between the real person and the imagined one causes damage. Sandra understood this better than I did. She always said the truth is easier to live with than the management of half-truths, even when the half-truth feels kinder in the moment. I thought I was protecting Eric. I thought I was teaching him something. Maybe both things were true. And also maybe I was just avoiding a conversation I didn't know how to have. Probably all three. What changed things wasn't the money. I want to be clear about that. When I showed Stuart the Vanguard account, I wasn't trying to prove my worth. I was done being managed, done being offered guidance I didn't need by people who had decided what category I belonged in. And the number on the screen was just the simplest way to say, you have the wrong picture. The letter Sandra left for Eric. I don't know exactly what she wrote. He's never told me, and I've never asked, but I know her. And I know she would have told him the truth about his father, the way she always told people the truth about things. Directly, without cruelty, but without softening it into something easier to swallow. She would have told him what we built together, and what it cost us, and what we hoped for him, and what she was afraid he was becoming. She would have said it with love, and without apology. That's the kind of person worth building a life next to. And the best thing I ever did, better than any contract, better than any property purchase, was recognize that early and stay. Eric came to Columbus. We drove around in the truck. We talked. It wasn't a movie moment. It was two stubborn people slowly adjusting their eyes to better light. He's still figuring out who his father actually is. I'm still figuring out how to show him. But we're doing it with the real information now. And that's something. The intelligence to build a thing, the integrity to build it honestly, and the endurance to keep showing up when nobody's watching. Those three things, in my experience, are what a life is actually made of. Not the story you tell about it at a party. The work underneath,